A hand reaches for a small white crystal. It rests quietly in a wooden bowl. It looks simple, almost invisible. Today, we sprinkle it on food without thinking. It sits on every table, in glass shakers and tiny paper packets. But there was a time when this white crystal ruled empires. It built cities. It started wars. This is the story of the salt that changed history. A story hidden in plain sight. A story that began long before coins and paper money. Imagine a world without refrigerators. No freezers. No electric light. Food could spoil in just a few days. Meat would rot under the sun. Fish would decay by the river. Hunger was always close. Then people discovered something powerful. A white mineral that could protect food. A crystal pulled from earth and sea. When rubbed into meat, it slowed decay. When mixed with fish, it preserved life. Suddenly, food could travel farther. Villages could survive long winters. Armies could march across deserts. Ships could cross oceans. But the strange part was, this mineral was not everywhere. Some lands had it. Others did not. Near the sea, salt dried in shallow pools. The sun pulled water into the sky. White crystals remained behind. In deep caves, miners carved it from rock. They chipped away at shining walls. Salt blocks fell like stone bricks. In some deserts, ancient lakes had dried up. Under the sand, thick salt layers waited. Hidden treasure beneath silent dunes. People began to understand its value, not as a spice, but as survival itself. Soon, salt became more than food protection. It became a symbol of power. Control salt, control life. Early traders loaded salt onto donkeys. They wrapped it in leather and cloth. They walked across hot plains. Caravans stretched across deserts. Long lines moving slowly under the sun. White blocks stacked high. Some journeys lasted weeks. Some lasted months. All for a mineral that looked so small. In ancient markets, salt was weighed carefully. Small scales balanced precious crystals. Every grain mattered. In some places, salt was traded for gold. Grain for grain. White for yellow. Few people knew how dangerous the trade could be. Desert storms could bury caravans. Bandits waited along narrow passes. Still, people kept traveling. Because without salt, cities could fall. Without salt, armies could starve. Rulers began to notice its importance. They saw the flow of caravans. They saw the wealth it created. And so, they made a decision. They would control it. They would tax it. Salt taxes appeared in ancient kingdoms. Ordinary families had to pay. Even the poorest needed salt. A simple mineral became a source of income. Governments grew rich from white crystals. Power gathered in royal hands. In some empires, soldiers were paid with salt. Their wages were measured in rations. It was part of their salary. The word salary itself comes from salt, from payments made long ago, a reminder hidden in language. But salt did more than fill stomachs. It shaped roads and trade routes. It connected distant cultures. Paths formed between salt mines and cities. These paths became highways of history. Caravans carved them into the earth. Some roads lasted for centuries. Stone by stone, they were strengthened, built for the movement of salt. Along these roads, ideas traveled too. Languages mixed. Stories spread. Salt carried more than flavor. It carried culture. It carried connection. In coastal villages, workers harvested sea salt. They raked crystals under bright skies. Their hands turned white with dust. In mountain mines, miners worked in darkness. Torches flickered against salt walls. The air was heavy and still. Every crystal represented labor. Sweat under the sun. Breath in deep caves. Because of this effort, salt became precious. Not rare everywhere, but never effortless. In some regions, salt was shaped into blocks. Large, heavy bricks. easy to carry and stack. These blocks were used as money. People traded goods for pieces of salt. A mineral became currency. In marketplaces, children watched traders bargain. Voices rose and fell. White dust floated in the air. Salt entered religious rituals. It symbolized purity and trust. It sealed agreements between families. To share salt was to share friendship. To break bread with salt meant peace. It was small, yet meaningful. But whenever something is valuable, conflict follows. Rulers guarded salt mines. Armies protected trade routes. Some cities were built near salt sources. Walls rose around them. Protection for precious crystals. Other cities suffered without access. They depended on imports. They depended on distant powers. Control of salt could weaken enemies. Cut off their supply. Watch them struggle. But most people did not think about politics. They thought about dinner. They thought about winter. A mother preserved fish with careful hands. She layered salt between each piece. She prepared for colder days. A fisherman packed barrels before sailing. Salted fish filled wooden containers. He hoped for safe return. In quiet kitchens and loud markets, salt worked silently. It protected life in simple ways. Yet beyond the table, history was shifting. Empires were rising. Trade networks were expanding. And salt stood at the center. But the story was only beginning, because soon, one empire would turn salt into a weapon, and what happened next would change the world. As kingdoms grew into empires, control became more serious. Leaders understood one truth clearly. Whoever controlled salt controlled stability. In ancient China, vast salt fields stretched under the sun. Workers evaporated seawater in wide pans. The air shimmered with heat. Chinese rulers did not leave salt to chance. They created a state monopoly. Only the government could produce and sell it. Officials recorded every grain. Documents were stamped and sealed. Salt became part of national policy. The income was enormous. Taxes from salt funded armies. They funded roads and great walls. Few people realized how deeply salt shaped this empire. From village kitchens to imperial courts, the white crystal moved through every level of society. Far to the west, another empire relied on salt. The Roman Empire expanded across continents. Its legions marched endlessly. Roman soldiers needed preserved food. They needed salted meat for long campaigns. Without it, armies could not survive. One famous road led directly from salt fields. It connected the coast to the capital. This road became known as the Via Salaria. Carts rolled along its stone surface. Wheels echoed between hills. Salt moved steadily toward Rome. Roman leaders taxed salt carefully. They understood its importance. Too much tax could cause anger. Too little tax meant lost income. Balance was everything. Salt required careful control. But not every empire found balance. In some lands, salt taxes became heavy. People struggled to afford it. Families had no choice. They needed salt to live, so they paid. But resentment slowly grew. A quiet frustration spread. The white crystal felt heavier each year. Across the Sahara Desert, salt moved in massive caravans. Camels carried huge slabs on their backs. The journey was long and dangerous. In the ancient city of Timbuktu, salt was worth its weight in gold. It crossed continents to arrive there. Merchants traded gold for salt blocks, yellow metal for white stone, an exchange of survival and wealth. The desert sun burned endlessly. Sandstorms swallowed entire caravans. Still, traders kept moving, because cities depended on them, because kings depended on them, because salt meant life. But the strange part was, even in regions with plenty of salt, rulers sometimes limited access. They created licenses and strict rules. Only approved merchants could sell it. Competition was forbidden. This increased prices. It increased government power. It increased tension. In medieval Europe, salt became a daily necessity. Fish was heavily salted before winter. Barrels lined dark cellars. Entire fishing industries depended on salt. Without it, boats would stay in harbor. Without it, markets would empty. Some regions built salt roads across mountains. Narrow paths carved into cliffs. Mules carried heavy loads along steep edges. Every step was risky. One slip could mean disaster. But the journey continued. Salt shaped geography itself. Cities grew where salt was easy to find. Other regions fell behind. In France, a powerful salt tax called the gabelle was created. It forced citizens to buy a fixed amount each year, even if they did not need it. The tax felt unfair. Smugglers began to appear. Illegal salt moved through forests at night. Men risked prison to avoid high prices. Women hid small bags beneath clothing. Whispers filled quiet villages. Salt became more than seasoning. It became a symbol of injustice, a symbol of distant authority. The anger did not explode immediately. It grew slowly, like a storm forming far away. But it was building. Meanwhile, governments relied heavily on salt income. Budgets depended on it. Armies depended on it. If salt sales dropped, treasuries suffered. If taxes failed, rulers worried. The crystal controlled finances. In some regions of Africa, salt slabs were cut carefully. Each slab was shaped by hand. Each one had value. Caravans transported them across vast lands. Songs echoed across the desert. Trade connected cultures. Salt influenced language and custom. It shaped rituals and hospitality. To share salt meant loyalty. Yet beneath these traditions, power struggles continued quietly. Control was always the central issue. Few people imagined that salt could challenge empires. It seemed too small, too ordinary. But history often turns on simple things. Not always on weapons. Not always on kings. Sometimes it turns on daily necessities. On items everyone must have. On something as basic as salt. By the 18th century, global trade networks expanded rapidly. Ships crossed the oceans carrying cargo. Salt traveled in wooden barrels. It moved from colony to colony. It moved under imperial flags. European empires began controlling salt production abroad. They imposed new taxes on distant lands. Local people had little say. In some colonies, citizens were forbidden from collecting their own salt, even from their own shores. This rule seemed simple, but its impact was deep. It affected millions. Because salt was not a luxury. It was not optional. It was essential. The tension between empire and people tightened. A quiet pressure filled the air. Something was about to change. And soon, in one distant land, a single peaceful act involving salt would shake the foundations of an empire. In the early 20th century, a vast land lived under foreign rule. Its people farmed, traded, and prayed. But many decisions were made far away. This land was India. It was controlled by the British Empire. Laws were written in another language. Among many rules, one law felt especially unfair. The British controlled salt production. Indians were forbidden from making their own salt, even along the long coastline where the sea touched the sand. People could not freely collect salt. They had to buy it from the government, and they had to pay a tax. Even the poorest families paid. For wealthy officials, the tax was small. For laborers and farmers, it was heavy. Salt became a daily reminder of control. But the strange part was, salt came from their own land, from their own sea. One man saw the power of this injustice. He understood that salt touched everyone, rich and poor, Hindu and Muslim. His name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Many people called him Mahatma Gandhi. He believed in peaceful resistance. Gandhi did not choose weapons. He chose symbols. He chose simple acts. In 1930, he announced a plan. He would walk to the sea, and he would make salt. At first, it sounded small. Just a walk. Just a handful of salt. But what happened next surprised everyone. Thousands began to pay attention. The world started to watch. Gandhi began his journey from his ashram. He walked slowly with a wooden staff. A small group followed him. They moved from village to village. Dust rose beneath their feet. Crowds gathered along the roads. Each day, more people joined. Men, women, students, farmers. The line grew longer. Newspapers reported the march. Photographers captured quiet determination. The story crossed oceans. The journey lasted 24 days. More than 200 miles on foot, under the hot Indian sun. At night, Gandhi spoke to villagers. He explained why salt mattered. He spoke calmly and clearly. He said the tax was unjust. He said Indians had the right to their own resources. He invited peaceful action. When the marchers reached the coastal village of Dandi, the sea stretched wide before them. Waves rolled gently onto the shore. On April 6, 1930, Gandhi bent down toward the sand. He picked up a small lump of salty mud. With that simple act, he broke the British salt law. He did not shout. He did not fight. He simply lifted the salt in his hand. A quiet gesture, but powerful. Across India, people followed his example. They began making salt from seawater. They boiled it in small pots. Others marched peacefully in cities. They held no weapons. They carried determination. The British government responded quickly. Police arrested protesters. Thousands were sent to prison. Even Gandhi was arrested. He was taken away quietly. But the movement did not stop. Images of peaceful protesters being beaten shocked the world. Foreign newspapers published the stories. People began asking questions. Why arrest someone for salt? Why punish peaceful citizens? The salt law suddenly looked unreasonable. Its simplicity made it powerful. Its injustice was easy to understand. Because everyone needs salt. Everyone understands salt. No explanation was necessary. The movement spread beyond the coast. It spread into towns and villages. It spread into hearts. The Salt March became a turning point, not because of violence, but because of unity. Salt connected millions of people. A daily necessity became a symbol of freedom. The white crystal carried hope. British officials realized something important. Controlling salt meant controlling people. But losing control of salt meant losing authority. The empire began to feel pressure. International opinion shifted. Criticism grew louder. Though independence did not come immediately, the Salt March changed the struggle. It gave it new strength. Few people expected such a small mineral to challenge one of the largest empires in history. Yet it did. Salt had once funded empires. Now it was weakening one. History had turned again. The story of salt was no longer just about trade. It was about rights. It was about dignity. Across the world, other nations watched closely. They saw the power of peaceful protest. They saw the power of shared necessity. Salt proved something important. Change does not always begin with armies. Sometimes it begins with a handful of sand. As the years passed, India moved closer to independence. The salt law lost its grip, but the image remained. A man bending toward the shore, lifting a simple crystal. The white grain had traveled far, from ancient caravans to colonial resistance, from trade routes to freedom movements. And yet, the story was not finished, because salt still shapes our world today, in quiet ways we rarely notice. The crystal that preserved food, that funded empires, had now helped awaken a nation. But the final twist in this story is not about kings or colonies. It is about us. Because every time we reach for salt, We are touching a mineral that once changed the course of history. Today, salt sits quietly on our tables. It no longer looks powerful. It looks ordinary. Factories produce it in huge amounts. Machines grind and package it. Trucks carry it across highways. It is cheap. It is everywhere. It feels unlimited. But the strange part was, for thousands of years, salt shaped human survival. Without it, cities could not grow. Without it, armies could not travel. Without it, winter meant hunger. It preserved fish in coastal villages. It protected meat in mountain towns. It made long journeys possible. Salt built trade routes across deserts. It carved roads through mountains. It connected distant cultures. Caravans once stretched across the Sahara. Camels carried heavy salt slabs. Their shadows moved across endless sand. Ancient miners chipped salt from dark caves. Torches flickered on crystal walls. Their work fed entire regions. In Rome, salt helped supply legions. In China, it filled imperial treasuries. In France, it sparked anger. And in India, it became a symbol of freedom. A simple act challenged authority. A handful of salt shook an empire. Few objects in history have traveled so far. From survival to taxation. From trade to protest. Salt changed language itself. Words like salary still carry its memory. History hides inside everyday speech. It changed geography. Cities grew near salt lakes and seas. Borders formed around salt sources. It changed politics. Rulers created monopolies. Governments enforced taxes. And when control became unfair, salt inspired resistance. It united ordinary people. But today, we rarely think about this story. We pour salt without reflection. We pass the shaker without pause. In modern supermarkets, rows of salt line bright shelves. Sea salt, rock salt, iodized salt. Technology has made it simple. Refrigerators now preserve food. Salt is no longer our only protection. Its power has softened. Its political weight has faded. Its drama feels distant. Yet its legacy remains. Every preserved tradition carries its trace. Every ancient road remembers it. History often focuses on kings and battles. But sometimes the true force is something smaller, something quiet, something ordinary, something essential. Salt reminds us of this truth. Great change can begin with daily needs. Power can hide in simple things. A crystal formed by sun and sea once determined the fate of nations. It shaped economies and revolutions. It proved that control over essentials means control over people, and losing that control changes history. When Gandhi lifted salt from the shore, he understood its meaning. He understood its universality. Everyone needs salt. Everyone understands salt. It belongs to all. That is why it became powerful. Not because it was rare everywhere, but because it was necessary everywhere. This small mineral connected humanity across deserts and oceans, across centuries and cultures. It carried survival in its crystals. It carried wealth in its trade. It carried courage in its protest. And now it carries memory. A memory hidden in kitchens. A memory hidden in language. The next time you taste salt, pause for a moment. Consider its journey. From ancient salt pans under burning suns, to dark underground mines, to peaceful marches along the sea. Consider the caravans that crossed deserts, the miners who worked in silence, the protesters who walked for freedom, all connected by white crystals, all shaped by a simple need, all part of one long story. History is not only written in books. It is written in everyday objects. It is written in what we touch. Salt is one of those objects. Quiet, common, overlooked, yet powerful beyond measure. Empires rose with it. Empires weakened because of it, and ordinary people changed history through it. What other simple things might be shaping our world today? What do we overlook? Perhaps power does not always shine. Perhaps it rests in small grains, waiting to be understood. The story of salt teaches us something gentle. Never ignore the ordinary. It may hold extraordinary influence. In quiet kitchens and vast deserts, salt left its mark, and it still does. The crystal that once changed history now waits patiently in your hand, silent, but its story continues. Each time we share a meal, each time we learn from the past. If you enjoyed discovering this hidden history, there are many more ordinary objects with extraordinary stories. Stay curious about the small things. They often shape the largest events. And next time you pass the salt, remember, you are holding a piece of history,